The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jorge Carlos de Almeida Fonseca, President of the Republic of Cabo Verde. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Jorge Carlos de Almeida Fonseca, President of the Republic of Cabo Verde, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Excellencies, heads of state and government, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the General Assembly, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, heads of delegation, Excellencies, international relations, diplomacy in general, major world and United Nations conferences in particular, have gotten us used to traditional meetings marked by physical presence and effusiveness among participants. In-person meetings, handshakes, hugs, conversations in the corridors, negotiations in bilaterals or small committees have always been at the center of these international community gatherings, which the requirement of online and digital communication has made a thing of the past, almost 2 years ago. The fact that we meet in person on the occasion of the general debate of this 76th session of the General Assembly should be interpreted as a reflection of our collective determination to do everything to defeat the scourge of the COVID-19 pandemic, toward building back better and having a more resilient world. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, it is with this positive attitude that I begin my statement and greet, on behalf of the people of Cabo Verde, all other peoples of the United Nations represented here by their highest dignitaries, wishing progress and well-being to all. To the outgoing President of the General Assembly, Mr. Volkan Bozkır from Turkey, congratulations on his performance of his duties during the difficulties of which we are all aware. I congratulate Mr. Abdullah Shahid on his election as President of the 76th session of the General Assembly, and welcome the fact that he is from the Maldives and the 6th President from a small island developing state such as Cabo Verde, which reflects our multilateral system's inclusiveness. I also congratulate the President-elect for having chosen hope as the theme of his presidency. In our history, Excellencies, Cabo Verde has always chosen the optimism of hope rather than the pessimism of resignation. And indeed, today, As we face this exponential pandemic challenge, hope is the way forward, especially if we can act quickly, together, and in solidarity. I also offer my most cordial greetings and words of appreciation to the Secretary General Antonio Guterres. First, because halfway through the previous session, he completed his first term with the honor of having carried out, and above all, championing the mobilization of the United Nations and the world in the fight against the pandemic and its devastating effects, and particularly in advocating for unprecedented need for universal and more equitable access to vaccines against COVID-19. Second, I congratulate him on his re-election, which signaled a renewed vote of confidence from the community of the United Nations to continue the work undertaken thus far. Finally, I congratulate him for the publication last September 10th of an excellent report entitled Our Common Agenda, which marks the beginning of his second term. Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers, ambassadors, the media. More than responding to what has been asked of him, that is, to guide the responses to the commitments of the Declaration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the Secretary General, in his proposal for a common agenda, offers us his vision of the future of the world and the role of the United Nations. A future that depends on our collective choice between continuing on the descent to destruction caused by the COVID-19 virus, climate change, and the erosion of human rights, or resuming a rise to progress, inclusion, environmental sustainability and development, including by means of an effective United Nations system that gives meaning to multilateralism. Mr. Secretary General, Cabo Verde has no doubts regarding the future you wish. Therefore, you can count on our country in this journey, particularly toward the goals you wish to achieve, to find the solutions you wish to implement with your proposal to hold the Summit of the Future as recommended in our common agenda, namely, to forge a new global consensus on what our future should look like and what we can do today to secure it. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Cabo Verde is a small island nation spread across the Atlantic belt of the Sahel, but it is also a great nation, combining its resident population and a broad diaspora spread across the four corners of the world, but with their heart in Cabo Verde. After a historic period of dependence, slavery, and colonization, independence gave us the hope of making our own choices and place this responsibility in our own hands. To support us in this process, we chose multilateralism, international cooperation, and strategic partnerships for our dynamic inclusion in a global world. We have also chosen along this path, and gives us pride, that we are a democracy for 30 years and with good governance based on the rule of law, peace, security, promotion and protection of human rights, gender equality and inclusion, as well as the fight against poverty and inequality. As part of our progress, we graduated from the list of least developed country to the category of medium-income country in 2008. In 2015, we achieved most of the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, and chose to align ourselves with the Sustainable Development Goals. And to such end, we adopted the Strategic Plan for Sustainable Development, PEDS. The onset of COVID-19 and its health, economic, and social impact has brutally torn down our economy, which had been growing at an approximate clip of 6%. It undermines the main pillars of our economy, which are the tourism, transportation, and domestic demand, causing losses in social protection, unemployment, and increased poverty. It wreaks havoc in macroeconomic fundamentals, such as inflation, budget deficit, debt, and a sharp drop in economic growth. In short, it has spurred an unprecedented recession that has contracted our economy by 14.8%. But my country did not react with resignation, but with determination, and immediately took all the anti-crisis measures recommended internationally for the short term. And for the medium and long term, we engaged in a participatory exercise in strategic planning to set a common vision for 2030, titled Cabo Verde Ambition 2030, in order for us to resume the sustainable development process and build back better, leveraging the lessons learned and opportunities arising from the crisis. This includes access to concessional financing and attracting foreign direct investments, which continue to be major challenges. As mentioned in the PEDS and Ambition 2030 documents, Cabo Verde intends to strengthen our alignment with the values and interests steeped in multilateralism and a rules-based world order, with an effective United Nations organization at its center. Such goals required the continued affirmation of Cabo Verde as a safe country and a useful and credible partner in the performance of a diplomacy that is equal to the new challenges of the world. At this juncture, Cabo Verde's foremost priority is to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We have made significant and consistent gains both in reducing transmission rates and in increasing vaccination rates among the eligible population, which has reached 74% with at least one dose. Our goal is to have 85% of the eligible population fully immunized by the end of October. This success would not have been possible without the perseverance and determination of the leaders and the people of Cabo Verde, or without the increased global solidarity of our partners, particularly in the context of COVAX. Our most heartfelt thanks to all of you. At the same time, economic recovery remains an important priority for Cabo Verde, mainly through the reopening of the tourism sector and related activities. The mutual recognition of certificates of vaccination and the revision of travel advisories are measures with which Cabo Verde has been working on with public and private partners, and international guidelines will only support and encourage the return of tourism. Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers, ambassadors, media professionals. Cabo Verde has all the structural characteristics of a small island developing state, namely small size and dispersion on islands in large oceanic spaces and distance from major markets, which weakens our economic base, heightens our exposure to climate change and other environmental phenomena, such as droughts, in addition to reducing our resilience to natural phenomena and other external shocks. In this context, the manifestations and impacts of COVID-19 only exacerbate pre-existing conditions, rendering SIDS as those most affected by the pandemic. Within the United Nations, Cabo Verde is part of the Association of Small Island States, AOSIS, which advocates for global support measures specifically for SIDS. For international and differentiated measures that have been advocated for since the Rio Conference in 1992. In this context, the study, debate, and desirable adoption by international consensus of the so-called multidimensional vulnerability index applicable to small island developing states with respect to 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental, should be helpful in classifying each nation's level of development to determine eligibility for such specific support measures, thus enabling the fulfillment of the commitments established under the Samoa Pathway. Small island developing states in each of the 3 covered geographic regions, Pacific, Caribbean, and from Africa to Southeast Asia, have sectors that offer opportunities for economic growth in natural resources, tourism, and the blue economy, among others. Measures to support economic growth and competitiveness in such areas of growth, support for climate adaptation and increased climate resilience, support facilities for direct investments, as well as general and climate finance are examples of measures that should be undertaken globally for the benefit of small island developing states and adjusted to each nation in particular. Finally, SIDS, their problems, challenges, and solutions should be a part of the Summit of the Future that was announced by the Secretary General as part of the problems, but also as part of the solutions. This will be an opportunity for us to make decisions that meet the specific and legitimate interests and aspirations of this group of nations, which are among the most vulnerable within the United Nations family. We must leave no one behind. Excellencies, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, heads of government and state, ministers, ambassadors, free media professionals. The preservation of international peace and security was at the heart of the creation of the UN. For Cabo Verde, the values of liberty, peace, democracy, and political stability are fundamental for the construction of more just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. Faced with global challenges, we are increasingly aware of how imperative this fundamental goal of the peoples that sign the United Nations Charter is. We are also aware that political instability that plagues different regions and heightened insecurity resulting from violent extremism as well as transnational crime are barriers to the development and peaceful coexistence among nations. The effectiveness that we seek from the United Nations requires periodic and consistent reforms of its main entities. We do recognize the progress achieved so far with reforms in its development pillar, which have increased the efficiency of the United Nations system in a progressive and innovative way. The revitalization of the General Assembly has allowed us to be more pragmatic in our deliberations. We also understand that the revitalization of the United Nations involves the need for Security Council reform to provide greater inclusion of member states in decisions related to international peace and security. As a member of the African Union, Cabo Verde subscribes fully to the Ezulwini Consensus. Excellencies, the history of the world has been a succession of crises and new opportunities for progress in the future. With the ongoing crisis, we have often noted that this crisis also offers opportunities and calls for action from the generations in charge today, as well as the youth who will be in the front lines in the future. As a crisis, the COVID pandemic has destroyed lives, compromised healthcare, destroyed economies and social protection systems, reduced opportunities in education and employment for youth, and increased poverty and inequality, further exposing us to the effects of climate change and further weakening the most vulnerable. But we have also seen opportunities that have risen from the fight against the pandemic, or from the search for technology-based solutions to minimize the effects of physical distancing in communication, management, education, entertainment, diplomacy, and business, and to monitor the progress of transmission the role of science in its race to obtain a vaccine in record time, and the multiple forms of creative adaptation and response to these times, and in many other fields of activity. However, the COVID crisis is also part of a chain of other crises, such as climate change, geopolitical conflicts, and criminal insecurity, and their interconnectedness results in increased division among those who have and those who have not, both nationally and internationally, particularly with regard to access to vaccines for all, and to financial conditions and means to build back better. The missing link between crises and opportunities lies in the exercise of greater global solidarity to turn possible solutions into realities that will allow us to build the future we want, as well as the United Nations we need. For both to happen or not, the action of any individual state will not be enough. But both are perfectly achievable through collective action of the massed majority, through solidarity. The future we want has always been enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and its goals of more peace and security, protection and promotion of human rights, and international cooperation for economic, social, and cultural progress for all, provided that these goals are actually achieved. On the other hand, the United Nations we need has always been a debate between what the organization should do and what it can actually deliver. The difference is in collective action that can bring together as much as possible what should be done and what can be done. The results achieved thus far by the United Nations system may be broadly increased or improved in all areas, from sustained peace to sustainable development. The future we want depends on our ability to seize the opportunities that arise from the crises we face. My friends, the way forward is multilateralism, revisited and strengthened to meet the great challenges of the present. And the place for this new beginning may well be the summit of the future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I end my remarks, please allow me a moment of personal privilege. As I am nearing the end of my second term, and as my country is due to hold presidential elections on October 17th, this is the last time that I appear before you in this august assembly as President of the Republic of Cabo Verde. I will have the best memories of this House of the United Nations, and I reiterate my full commitment to continue to defend and promote, together with you, the inalienable values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and peace. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I would like to thank the President of the Republic of Cabo Verde for the statement just made. I ask protocol to escort His Excellency. I would like to remind members of the following mitigation measures for this meeting. All delegates must use a face covering at all times when they are in public areas and in the GA hall. except when they are taking the floor during the meeting. The size of the delegation should not exceed 4 people in the General Assembly Hall.